Well, good afternoon, everyone, from here in London, and I'm absolutely delighted to have with us today for this FS Club webinar a dear friend of mine, Sarah Goddard, who's Secretary General of AMICE. Sarah is going to be talking to us about passion and purpose, what EU insurance mutuals and cooperatives have been doing well during COVID-19. She's dialing in actually from Dublin, but is normally based in Brussels as part of our continuing outreach post-Brexit to the rest of the world from the center of the world here in the United Kingdom. Anyway, you'll all know me. I'm Michael Mainelli. I'm one of the directors of Yen, and it really is a privilege to be able to introduce these webinars because of our sponsors. We have one of the nicest and most tolerant group of sponsors who allow us to range widely and freely across technology, economics, and finance. And today, very much of the finance area, but also, and I think one of the things that's definitely going to come across today is the element of social purpose. I wrote a book post the financial crisis in 2009, published really within 6 months of the collapse of RBS. And one of the points I made in there that, in my opinion, one of the greatest causes of the financial crisis had been the loss of demutualization. In fact, loss of mutualization. I called it diluted demutualization. And I think Sarah's going to be touching on many aspects of that today and showing that it can be done and done well. Now, my job, as you know, is to get out of the way and let you hear from our expert, and I'll do so in just a moment. If I can just remind you of a few things. Firstly, yes, folks, the slides are available, and they're in fact already posted in the chat room and on the website. Yes, there is a recording, and it will be going up in approximately 48 hours. And yes, we would love you to ask questions, but could you please use the GoToWebinar question facility on the panel that you have. I'm here with you, and those of you who send me texts and emails, it's all very kind, but I won't be looking at it until afterwards. So let's have those questions, comments, and observations to me via the chat facility, and I will feed them in to the conversation with Sarah that will begin at 1:30. Anyway, that's all I've got to say because I'm as excited as you are. Sarah, the floor is very much yours.
Hi there, Mike. Thanks so much for inviting me to join you today in the FS Club. And it's nice to be in contact with people around the world. I know that you get people who are gathering from all across the globe. Just to say, I will be focusing on Europe, EU. Bear in mind, though, that we do have a UK member still that joined us when the UK was still part of the EU. So I will be bringing up some bits and pieces that are UK focused too. But it's lovely to be here and great to be connecting with you again in the FS Club. So as you can see, everybody, passion and purpose. This is what I'll be talking about and what we've been doing and what we've been seeing our members doing to support their members, which is what we generally call the policyholders, during the COVID-19 crisis. If we could move on to the next slide. I would like just to ask you, first of all, a very interesting question, which is how well has the insurance industry responded to the COVID-19 crisis? I know that there's quite a lot that's going on at the moment. If you could please select out of these four, because I don't think we want to get an average answer from this. We want to know whether the industry is above the scale or below the scale as far as the median is concerned.
Great, Sarah. Well, the FS Club audience is ever swift. Over 60%, over 70% of the audience have now voted. Give me just a second to leave it open, a couple more seconds, and I'll show you the results.
Thank you.
Okay, well, we're well over the 80% mark, so I'm going to share those results with you. And as you can see here, nearly half the audience think poorly.
Wow.
On the other hand, adequately, well, very well. But 44% poorly. Anyway, back to you, Sarah.
It means that we're definitely more than 60% think that the industry has been below where it should be. My view, and I hope that I'm not too biased in this, is that there's been a lot that's been going on, and this is what I've seen from the mutual and cooperatives specifically, which may inform you of things that haven't been hitting the headlines so much, which haven't been there at the higher levels. Now, having said that, I think one of the things that's important is that we understand what the mutual structure itself is. So what I've done today is show you the mutual structure, what that is within the context of Europe, where that moves into the social economy agenda and what social economy is about. And then we'll go into exactly what our insurers have been doing well and what I suspect the future holds from that. So if we could move to the next slide. The problem with the mutual structure is that there is not a consistent type of mutual or recognition of mutual across Europe. This creates problems. This creates problems in all sorts of ways because what is recognized as a mutual in one country will be recognized as a general insurer in another country. What we've tried to do with our sister organization, ICMIF, which is the global federation, is identify those insurers in Europe that have the values and are maybe part of a larger mutual group to be able to try to get some good information and data around what we see as being the impact and the size of the industry. So what that leads us to is finding a way of being able to identify something as a mutual insurer. And you'll see this, there are 5 mutual characteristics. The first ones is that they are private legal entities, not necessarily recognized as being a mutual legal entity, but they are under a private legal entity structure. They are not for profit. Now, the not-for-profit doesn't necessarily mean that they don't make profits. It's that they don't distribute profits in the same way as a listed company. So the profits may be retained in various ways. This is coming into our point 5. It may be through own funds, developing products which are of need or by request of their members, but those which maybe would be more onerous to be provided by the conventional market, providing discounts, rebates, all sorts of other benefits to their members. And then in a larger social environment, they tend to be democratically governed, and importantly, they are solidarity based. So the members, the policyholders, are the owners, and these are the ones that are right in the center of what the mutual is trying to achieve. There are 4 stakeholders within the mutual that all look into the members. So for the benefit of the members, as I've said, the surplus is used for them. There isn't a dividend into an external shareholder. Every member is included and participates in a democratic governance. That tends to be one member, one vote. They're involved, therefore, in the overall direction of the mutual. From the market position, the mutuals are a significant part of the European market. Not many people seem to understand this. They compete and therefore provide competition and therefore more choice to the policyholder themselves. Sorry, could you go back a slide, Mike? I'm just going through the 4 panels. Thank you. Because they've got this closer relationship with their policyholders, you'll see that they innovate. They understand very well what the policyholder, the owner, actually needs as far as an insurance product is concerned. And this can be over a range of all types of products, including pensions as well. And they can respond to those needs as good as possible. But the other difference that they tend to display as a characteristic within the market is this long-term business orientation. So investment behaviors tend to be looking at something over a very significant period of time, even if they're involved in short-term business. So a typical non-life mutual insurer will be taking a different attitude towards its investment portfolio than you might see coming through from a standard general insurer. And some of that behavior is actually being displayed in some of the changes that they've made in their direction and in their actions over the course of the pandemic. Society is also seen as a significant and important stakeholder for the mutuals. So social responsibility, engaging in society, supporting society, and also in the relationship with their employees to ensure that there's long-term stability for their employees. And again, I'll be able to give you an example or two of that when we go further through. And from an economy perspective, that seen as, because of the social responsibility, they're also seen as stable. We saw a big increase in the uptake of insurance with mutuals post the financial crisis. The market penetration deepened considerably in Europe, and some of those who have been around the insurance market as long as me will remember that in the 90s we were talking about a flight to quality in the London market. We saw something not dissimilar at the beginning of the last decade in a flight to quality with the mutual and cooperative market, a lot from the consumers rather than commercial policyholders, as they were looking for somewhere where they felt safe, they felt secure, they felt that they had some control, and that there was this longevity of relationship, which meant they didn't have the worries about would their policy pay out at some point in time. And again, if we could move on to the next one, we get that coming through. Thank you. Oh, so if we look at what the size of the mutual and cooperative marketplace or market share is at the moment in Europe, you can see that overall there's almost a third of European insurance is transacted with mutual or cooperative insurers. That insurance is mainly non-life, but there's a quarter of the life market is there. What we haven't included is pensions. Pensions are significant in certain markets as well within Europe. The penetration is different depending on the country, but you'll see from the graph I put there on the right, these are actually not just the top 10 markets by market share in Europe for mutuals and cooperatives. These are the top 10 in the world. So there is significant penetration in a number of significant European economies. That, as I say, has been a trend that's been increasing over the 10 years from 2007 to the date of this, 2017. That in that year meant that the assets under management were $3.5 trillion. This is seen as obviously an important amount of investment to help secure development within the European economy overall. The number of policyholders was over 430 million. And, we're talking about more than 450,000 employees. So there is a significant impact that the mutual and cooperative insurers have within the markets. In my experience, and I have to say that I was as guilty as this as many others many years ago, the view is that the mutuals tend to be the small, very specific organizations which are looking at a very small part of the market or are very focused on specific lines of business. That is true for some. Absolutely. We see small mutuals in the Netherlands, for example, that are focused on one particular crop. However, if you look at the mutual and cooperatives in the top 10, in fact, I was looking the other day at the top 20 insurers in Europe, and something like 40% of them are mutuals. Some of the biggest names, some of the top 10 in the world are actually of mutual structure. So that means that we have a very diverse community. Some of those will be looking at international and global issues. A lot of them will be looking at very small local issues, but the whole amount is covered by the mutuals. Again, as close as they are to their policyholders, even with the large ones, because of the way they tend to be structured, we see a great understanding between the needs of the policyholder, the control of the policyholder, and understanding how that can be moved into areas of risk reduction as well as pure insurance policies. And this again is a move that we've seen where our members are looking very much at life from the prevention angle as well as from the restitution angle. There are a number of activities they've been involved in and continue to be involved in at European level and with local communities, and then all the range in between. For example, city resilience, for crop protection. So protection is a very important part of what the mutuals are offering to their policyholders. If we could move on, please, Michael, that would be great. Thank you. But part of this is this embeddedness in the social economy. And I wanted to just give a quick explanation to everybody joining us on what the social economy actually is, because again, it's a very diverse group. It's everything from people who are looking at local disability issues to financial services, and across a whole panoply of activities. And that it has to be areas of commonality in order to be part of the social economy. So you will see there that the individual, whether that be the consumer or the individual in a legal sense, is given primacy within the model. This is something which is a democratic model. It's voluntary, it's open, and it looks at in making sure that the individual member's interest is embedded within a social interest at the same time. Social economy organizations are not part of the governmental or administrative environment, so they're separate from the policymakers, but engaged with the policymakers themselves, to the benefit of the individual. It's about trying to ensure sustainability, solidarity, providing innovation because of the understanding of where those requirements are, and then looking at ensuring that there is a strong future within that model. The good thing about social, or the more recent changes on the social economy side, are that there is now an EU interparliamentary group on social economy, which is great. It means that the policymakers, the parliament itself, is now engaged in seeing this as one of the fundamental areas where there will be a regrowth of the European model, of the EU model, and that those players, such as the mutuals and the cooperatives, which we're representing at AMICE, are core within that change forward. So let's move on now to where the mutuals and cooperatives have actually been doing well. And we've asked this question of our members, and we've had the most astonishing answers from right the way across Europe. And this has been a program that we've been engaged on in AMICE from March. So we now have more than 10 months of data on what's been going on. Information. This isn't really data. This is where it's making a real change to people. I mentioned earlier on that one of our members is a UK association, which is the Association of Financial Mutuals. Now, they are small mutuals in the UK. What's been very interesting seeing how they are developing is that they are going from strength to strength at the moment. They have so many members, policyholders wanting to join, extending what they're doing with their mutuals, and they're seeing exponential growth currently. And their CEO, Martin Shaw, asked his members, so these are all, as you can see on the side, these are all the small mutuals from, and some of them not so small, from around the UK, as to what they've been doing, and how it's made a difference to their members and their local society. And you'll see everything from the top right hand corner, pay care, making food donations to a local homeless shelter, VDS providing 100 hours of free online training so that their members can help their clients, getting bikes for disabled, guaranteeing people employment so that there weren't uses of any furlough schemes, and that they were giving donations to health related causes. A lot of what you can see on this slide is reflected on what's been going on elsewhere in Europe, and it's really been going on from day one. So if we could move to the next slide, these the organization on the left, Mutual Medica, is a Spanish mutual, and they have reinvested 200 million into COVID support and prevention. You may not be aware, but in Spain, there's been a big there was the biggest life insurance policy ever that was created in Spain among the Spanish insurance market and mutuals in particular, the ones that I'm focusing on, was a free policy to all frontline healthcare workers. So if anybody became infected and had to take time off, they were given coverage. If anybody unfortunately lost their lives, there was a sum of money that would go to their next of kin. That's just a tip of the iceberg as to what's been going on there. We've seen a number of moves, such as premiums being taken down to the absolute legal minimum, so that people could still be covered for various classes of business, for example, for motor, but at the same time, they were being they were being asked for as little as possible in a period of time when they weren't actually able to use their vehicles, as an example. You'll see on the right hand side, Local Tapiola is a big Finnish insurer. And you can see some of the moves that they've been making to support their customers. So they were looking at flexible payments. Another thing that you'll see there that has been echoed in a number of countries is where the insurers as investors or owners of real estate have seen that the businesses that are inside their properties have been having problems because of the COVID crisis, that they've not been able to reopen shops or restaurants or barbers or whatever it happens to be, that they've been given either rent reductions or complete rent holidays. That's been happening through 2020 and into 2021. So wherever these supports can be given to try to help with the cash flow issues and the, if you like, the financial pressures that are being put on, in particular the SMEs, but not just the SMEs themselves, they've been involved. What you can see is that also on this slide that the trying to bring in the idea of providing services and facilities that will help people actually cope with their own personal involvement in the pandemic. There are a number of apps, platforms, supports that have been distributed in many, many EU countries, not just in many cases to their own members, but have been made freely available to society at large. So that whether it's people needing to speak to mental health counsellors, involvements with the Red Cross, all of this has been provided by a number of our members in a number of countries. The other thing that was very clear in the opening part of the pandemic was the amount of support that was being given into the front line and into health facilities. That was in the way of equipment, of cash where it was needed, of personnel. So medically qualified personnel that maybe were within the mutual cooperative, but within the insurer, were being allowed, if they wanted to go onto the front line itself, still being paid their full pay and given extra protection themselves in their own insurances from their employers, but actually able to contribute directly into when the first wave and the second wave were coming through. If we could move on again, that would be great. Thanks, Mike. I focused in on AHMED. This is probably a name that you know well. You may not be aware that it is within our mutual and cooperative family. What AHMED did, and this is the left-hand graphic, it's a press release of an initiative that it led back in April. I'm sorry, it hasn't come through very well. But as a large investor, AHMED decided to bring together a force to ensure that pharmaceutical companies actually cooperated in the development of vaccines for coronavirus. So it was actively using its influence as a large investor to move that forward into something that would come to market and come to us as quickly as possible, and not be something where and try to open up the opportunities of the pharmaceutical companies actually cooperating together rather than trying to close the barriers between their R&D departments. And you'll see on the right hand side there, where AHMED had made its own statements to how it was going to, what its commitments were to the combating of COVID-19. So you have both the medical combating. AHMED, as an example, was one of those insurers that released its medical staff into the front line where they felt like that they could make a difference, and they were comfortable about being released into it. They also obviously were encouraging the pharmaceutical companies, very strongly encouraging the pharmaceutical companies to get together to make sure that vaccines were available as soon as possible. They were looking at various ways and developing products to help with financial problems that were being brought about by being experienced by their customers. And they were also looking at how they could help their own staff. So this very quick transition into a working from home environment, those obviously have transitioned back at times and now back into working from home. We're all in different stages of lockdown or prevention from going into offices, but making sure that when people were working from home, that they had good working conditions, that it was clear to them that they had still the 34-hour standard working hours, rather than the possibility of being asked to do more because of the working from home. Then there was these sort of like these, if you like, almost spot products that were coming through. So continuity of care, contributions for care providers. There were products that were being developed as well, where people who were volunteering were being given extra cover free of charge. So on the next slide, we now have then these three general areas where we have seen, and we've been representing to the European institutions, what our members have been doing well. And I do hasten to add, I'm not saying that a lot of these weren't undertaken as well by other types of insurers. The headlines about the non-property damage business interruption cases, some of the issues around travel claims, some of the issues around credit insurance, absolutely, I understand them, and that they have been taking a lot of sort of like the gaze away from what else has been done. The NPD BI is a very difficult environment and very difficult question, which obviously is the one that the courts are dealing with. But if we look at what in general we have seen as being the overall categories for policyholder support, so it's premium rebates or holidays where the risks have changed due to governmental decisions. Now, I would say with that, because there's some criticism coming from time to time, that there haven't always been holidays or rebates in where people, as a good example, haven't been able to use their cars due to lockdown, where they haven't been allowed to go outside. What's very interesting on that is that it's one of those areas where the risk is probably changing. The motor risk is changing. In fact, that has been proven in certain countries during the summer. So some of the insurers, we've had conversations with some of our members about this, have taken the decision that rather than give rebates or holidays at the point that the lockdowns were happening, that will be amalgamated into what happens on motor renewal or on an extension of coverage once they've got a much better handle on what the actual overall 1 year life of the policy and the overall book has been doing over that period of time. I mentioned again that there's been extensions of insurance cover free for volunteers, again in a number of countries. The Netherlands has been leading on this. And claims filings have been an area where there's been a lot of work to ensure that it's as easy as possible for customers to be able to make their filings and get claims payments as swiftly as possible, particularly in that SME sector. And it's been kind of interesting talking to some of the insurers where, for example, they've been using drone technology to be able to go and make assessments as to what the level of loss actually is in environments where it would not be for people, for their own staff's health and safety, and it would imperil them if they went out in person. So they're finding these innovative ways of being able to deal with what we're seen as being barriers. Online medical advice services have been absolutely vital. I'm sure that all of us who are on this webinar today have either directly or indirectly known of people who've had to avail of this, but being able to provide them free of charge very quickly with the relevant people to be able to allay fears, make diagnoses, make recommendations on treatment has been really important. With the release of surpluses, it's worth mentioning here that the mutual and cooperative sector tends to have a higher solvency level because it's got a naturally more sort of long-term and maybe more cautious view of making sure it's got this stability year on year on year on year on year. But in these circumstances, there have been surplus releases, so that where policyholders and healthcare providers have found that they've been in challenging situations with lack of income or with the sort of financial pathway that's been going through, then they've been released to try to keep that stability for those particular sectors of their members. Premiums have been waived on liability insurance in certain circumstances, and there's been a big focus on having flexible payments for those smaller entities, again, either through released surpluses or through delaying premiums or through saying we will give you a period of time in which we will not be expecting more than the absolute minimum that is required by law. On the wider society, the supporting the healthcare systems was fundamental in the first wave. Seeing places being transformed, buildings being repurposed into almost field hospitals, with the large mutual and the smaller mutual healthcare insurers in particular, bringing in swathes of equipment, swathes of staff, swathes of PPE, and making sure that there was funding there to allow the medical experts go in and be able to engage as quickly as possible with those with the greatest needs. There was also a lot of work that was being done and contributions made into social projects and the medical research, whether that be for virus itself, for the COVID-19 vaccine, or whether it be for some of the other long-term health effects. And it's something to bear in mind that the health insurers from spring last year have already were putting into place their thinking on what is going to be the other impacts of COVID-19 as far as society is concerned, because we're looking at those consequential, maybe morbidity with other types of sickness where people were not consulting under their medical cover, where we'll see maybe an increase in certain types of cancer, and those structures are already being put into place to deal with the indirect medical consequences, which are likely to be fairly significant for a number of countries. One of the things that the European Union did was issue social bonds to help with the provision of healthcare and health insurance. And our members were very early to invest in those bonds because they saw them as being for the greater good of the European individual and the European whole as well. So there was significant investment in those, particularly from the Nordic and Benelux countries. But at the National Solidarity Fund and the frontline actors, we're talking about Médecins Sans Frontières, Red Cross. I can give you examples that stretch from Finland and Sweden in the north down to Italy in the south, across the east and west of the whole of the EU, about the support and the funding that was going into the National Red Cross, for example, setting up helplines with them, looking at how the mental crisis that was envisaged from lockdown would be developed through. At-risk groups have been coming into people's sort of gaze recently. But from March onwards and still now, they've been looked at very strongly to support. So whether it's refuges, places of safety for people who are in dangerous environments and couldn't get away, they've been supported. Again, many of our members put together big programs of buying and distributing technology to the children of people who were in the most impoverished parts of their country, so that they had access to online education, providing platforms to put citizens together with volunteers, and providing ways that technology can work through. So finally, with the support for employees, we had that swift adoption of work from home, as I said. A lot of them put in no furlough policies. And we've seen, for example, in France, that there has now been an active commitment from the mutual sector to increase the number of staff in the sector and to increase the number of apprentices. 2,000 new apprentices in insurance are going to be employed in France, to ensure that there are employment opportunities for young people, and that we can carry on providing the support into the longer term, which takes us to our longer term side. So I hope that's shown you that within our social economy role and in general, we are key stakeholders as mutual insurers into the revival of the economy. That's been through investment, and it's been through actual engagement and activity. We look at sustainability, and that is seen as being key, and that is seen from the European aspect as being what is going to bring through into whatever the new Europe develops into. We're involved in shared resilience solutions on a public-private partnership environment. So whether that be for the next European pandemic whether that's going to be for other, what could be global impacts. When Michael and I were talking earlier on, we were talking about cyber as one of those. But we do know that our relationship means that we can see what the socioeconomic needs are very quickly and respond to them. Interestingly, at the online Davos forum, which I'm delighted that you guys aren't actually watching that and watching us instead today. Well, I hope you're still watching us. But Klaus Schwab is again highlighting stakeholder capitalism. And he said just yesterday, this quote, that companies which were committed to the stakeholder concept have performed much better because they've invested in the long-term vitality of the company. That is what mutuality and cooperatives are about. That's actually the key of their model, and that convergence that there will be between business and civil society, which at the moment seems to be the kind of the structure that a lot of the forward thinkers are promoting. It's not a new one. I mean, mutuals have been around for hundreds of years, but it's bringing it. We seem to be going round in this circle of the future looks like it will be the structure, which a third of European insurance has been anyway. So, having heard that, I would like to ask you to poll again, to give me your thoughts on how well you believe the European insurance mutuals and cooperatives have responded to this crisis. So, Mike, over to you, please.
That's right. The poll's up there and running. We've just as ever, they're so fast off the buttons here at FS Club. Over half the audience has voted. We won't have quite as much time for Q&A as I'd hoped, folks, but we'll try and pack it in. So we've just got 3/4 of the audience voting. I'm now going to share the results.
Yay!
And there you can see. You swung audience opinion about your sector, Sarah, which strangely I think was something you were trying to do. And I think it's great.
I was hoping just to, I mean, I remember, like, for example, years back, there was, when I was in a different role, there was somebody I was talking to who was a travel insurer who said, you always hear where things go wrong, but you never hear where things go right.
That is so true.
There's a lot that's been going right.
And I'd agree with you, having had the nice opportunity to work with quite a few insurance mutuals, but also the building society movement and the credit unions. They have very different cultures. They do
Yeah.
live and breathe this stakeholder and member area. Anyway, we've got a lot of questions in very little time. So a quick one from Robert Woodthorpe Brown. Is Amice sharing these examples of best practice, assuming to hope to encourage a race to the top amongst your
Uh,
members?
Yes, well, what we've been doing is a number of initiatives actually, because we have been sharing them on social media as well, so that that best practice can be distributed to the world. We don't think this is only for the benefit of mutuals and cooperatives. We're not trying to put a barrier around it. So we've been doing a lot in that, and actually, when there was a best practice work being done by the European Commission, where they put out financial services best practice. We were deeply involved in that and the publication that came out of that, to try to make sure that there were appropriate measures that could be taken by insurers, but would be always in the policyholders' best interest. So we have been sharing that, and then within the membership as well. Yeah.
Okay. Mohammed Iqbal Asaria is curious, are there any signs of the demutualization trend being reversed in the EU or the UK? And could technology help in creating virtual mutuals?
Now that's an interesting question. I don't know how much under the regulatory environment a virtual mutual as such would be acceptable. There has been some growth in the UK in recent years, but there's also been some demutualization. So I think one of the things that is important to see is where it actually makes sense. I mean, there is still a number of very, very, very small mutuals in Europe that are probably likely to, at some point in time, because of the regulatory burden, likely to go into bigger groups or to maybe amalgamate. As far as new startups are concerned, we're not seeing much of that, but we're not seeing that in insurance in general.
Bob McDowell's curious that a generation or so, the finance sector went through a spate of demutualizations. What are the challenges to remutualization? I mean, particularly as a trade body, you've got an interest in encouraging the growth of the sector. And I'm curious, are there distinctions here? You know, what are you lobbying for at the moment to break down barriers to mutualization?
Well, I mean, one of the big barriers, obviously, is the fact that every country looks at a mutual as a different entity and deals with it differently legally. So, for example, you do have insurance mutuals permissible in Belgian law, but there's no other type of mutual that's permissible in Belgian law. Where I'm sitting here in Ireland, in fact, we have a couple of mutuals, but they come under different legislation completely. So that patchy landscape is one which creates problems. However, I mean, in recent years, we've seen new legislation put in place by two EU member states to recognise mutual insurance as a separate legal entity, and we've been working very strongly on the Solvency II 2020 review under the
Mm,
proportionality environment to have that nature, the mutual nature, being taken as the nature part of the nature scale and complexity because
mm,
of this relationship, because of the way that the funds are dealt with, because of the way that there's a closeness to the
mm.
policyholder and that they are the beneficiary. And some of that work hopefully will come through to something that we see as being a more fairer environment looking at mutuals. But that's
So,
our biggest barrier.
yeah. Well, in a parochial Brexit way, one therefore would anticipate if this is an area that hasn't really been equivalent in the first place, or we are likely to see more distinctions, at least between the UK and the EU, I guess. Just an interesting one, a nice hard-nosed question here from Mark Johnson. How have all these nice added benefits provided the policyholders hit the bottom line and requirements for capital? And has this, by any chance, resulted in an increase in policyholders during the COVID period?
An increase in the number of policyholders. I mean, I couldn't tell you because we haven't got the stats from the COVID period. As far as hitting the capital is concerned, well, I mean, because it's generally being done for the policyholders themselves, and they are the owners of the capital, if you like, then it's a
Yeah.
balance.
That's a good point, and it is astonishing your figures there of having nearly 500 million policyholders
Yeah.
and a half a million employees. That's pretty impressive. Those are pretty impressive numbers that we often ignore as not real finance. It's just sort of a small little area, and it's clearly not. Mark's also curious. Do you have any examples of where UK mutuals work differently in a negative way, perhaps, or no?
I haven't come across any of those, but I suppose work differently in a negative way. Um, well, first of all, I'd be kind of surprised. No, it depends on how I might be. Sorry, I'm not being very coherent, but that's because I'm trying to work out exactly what the question means.
No,
Is
just
that where
it was
mutual insurers?
an open question. Yeah. No, just curious if you had a negative example. In the time
No.
available, I've got a really nice one I'd like to close on, if that's okay, because we have run over a bit. It's again from Bob McDowell. Bob says the attributes of social responsibility change over time and generations. And I think I'd agree with Bob on that, in that we've seen even the nature of some of the mutuals that were formed in the old days of the late 1800s and 1900s have faded away, the friendly societies or brotherhoods and things like that. So how volatile is social responsibility and the ability of mutuals to respond to the changes?
That again is actually quite localized.
Mhm.
So, the I think that what we've seen in the past 10 months is that that volatility is something which we recognize, but isn't something that's measurable at the moment. Of course, the difference now is that if we go back to when a lot of those and a lot of the friendlies are still around actually, but when we go back to those early days, um, we didn't have to measure things quite as much. So there's probably it's going to be interesting to see if we can find a way of being able to bring measurements in that could actually begin to give us something that's much more predictive around that. I mean, if you look at the work that's being done at the moment on measuring sustainability, and sustainability is going beyond things like climate change into, it has the possibility to go into social volatility. It would be interesting to see if we could move that into more of a sustainability agenda as well, because that's about the long term.
Well, Sarah, it's been really great. You're running an amazing organization in a hardly hidden but often ignored and I think extremely unfairly sector, which has delivered over generations, centuries even, great good for society. And it's great to have an example of this sector pulling out as we have this global crisis and delivering what it's meant to do, which is shared benefits amongst the members. There are many tensions in that area, I know, but I'm glad that you're sharing a good news story. And that is, you're so correct. It's something we do far too frequently, and it's great to have one today. So thank you. And you certainly did sway the audience. If you can give me just a quick minute, I've got 3 rounds of thanks. Firstly, as ever, our sponsors. You are fantastic, and I hope that you've taken away some interesting ideas and not to overlook the mutual sector as quite a significant sector for many of the services and products that you provide. I would also like to thank you, the audience, again, as ever, very good at getting in your Q&A. I will be sending all those comments and questions to Sarah with your emails so she can get back to you personally if she'd like to. But a reminder that we've got quite a bit happening. Tomorrow, we've got a center web play for all those members who are part of the Employee Share Ownership Program. And on Friday, a fascinating session with Dietrich Bohler on fully grown, why a stagnant economy is a sign of success. And I think that's going to be thrilling. As ever, go to the website and check things out. But Sarah, we've known each other many years,
Yes,
and you and your husband and I have spent many evenings in Dublin and on the continent, most enjoyably chatting about all of these issues. I was
absolutely.
really delighted you took the time today to share it with our audience, and a good news story, and this time is something we all need. Unfortunately, I can't give you good news applause because the technology and everybody being at home, but I have brought my little Korean karmic clapper, and I will provide ersatz applause to say thank you very much. for
Thank you,
coming by
Michael.
and sharing with our crowd what's going on in your organization and amongst your many, many members. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you again. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to show what they're up to. I think it makes a difference.
Thank you.